Hello science fans and welcome to SHE-ensya. Today I present to you a video that highlights the importance of science and critical thinking in this brave new world that we have. This is a special talk that I made for the ScioMago's upgrade event last March 5, 2021. It's a strange new world. As the decade turned, we found ourselves facing multiple challenges. In 2019 to early 2020, the Philippines faced a lot of uncertainties as we experienced multiple earthquakes that culminated in a massive volcanic eruption that killed 39 people and destroyed almost 5 billion pesos worth of crops and fisheries. The hysteria that accompanied this explosion led to panic buying of food and masks, causing massive shortages that made the vulnerable even more vulnerable without really helping those in positions of privilege. Barely recovering, we were then assaulted by a new virus that seemed uncontrollable. It locked down our cities, forced learning into virtual spaces, and challenged the brave but limited capacities of our medical facilities. And so far, the Philippines has had the longest imposed quarantine all over the world, and we are expected to be one of the worst hit countries economically, all while having more than 575,000 cases and close to 13,000 deaths. It's funny, or maybe a bit strange, but while we're suffering through all of this, the space race is gearing up once again. With multiple launches of reusable rockets from SpaceX, placement of high-speed internet satellites in remote locations, and a more thorough exploration of Mars by the new Perseverance rover, complemented by UAE's HOPE and China's Tianwen-1 satellites. And back down here on Earth, while COVID-19 vaccines roll out all over Southeast Asia except the Philippines, biotechnology is also doing leaps and bounds for conservation biology. As the first clone of an endangered animal was born last December 10, 2020, and has grown to be a healthy animal that is a source of hope for restoring much-needed biodiversity to the planet. But with the deluge of natural and man-made calamities here in the Philippines, can we even keep up with the technological advancements of the world? I would like to say yes, because we have more than enough resources in the country to run amazing STEM projects, as well as an overwhelming amount of talent within our local community of scientists, engineers, and researchers. But what could be holding us back? Before I answer that question, we have to first talk about what science is. With the World Wide Web, we now have access to a lot of information, and it can be daunting to figure out which ones to believe in and which ones to dismiss. So as a warning to everyone, not all that sounds scientific is technically good science. And in the Philippines, this already confusing scenario is further aggravated by biases brought about by how political views affect our attitudes towards government-backed technologies and, of course, the sensationalism of local media. So in the Philippines, what's holding us back is a general lack of appreciation for science and technology because of our inability to evaluate it for what it truly is. But in order for us to be prepared for the challenges and even disasters of the new normal, we have to know what science truly is and what it is capable of. So what is science? Well, science refers to the reliable body of knowledge that can be rationally and logically explained. And when we say reliable, it means someone or something that's worthy of reliance and trust. But who do we trust? Well, the answer should be dependent on the topic that we're talking about, because the answer may vary if we're talking about the meaning of philanthropy, or how a science graduate takes advantage of her media status to gain influence beyond her expertise. It would depend on if we're talking about policies that ensure equity versus how to become rich in a cutthroat capitalist economy. And then, it would also vary dependent on our preconceived notions and biases. And it is these conscious or unconscious biases that make alternative facts or fake news or pseudoscience very dangerous. But what is pseudoscience? It is any type of information presented as scientific or factual, but does not adhere to a valid scientific method, lacks supporting evidence or plausibility, and it cannot be reliably tested. The anti-vaccination movement, especially in the time of COVID-19, is one of the leading examples of dangerous pseudoscience. Of course, vaccination opposition isn't a new concept. As long as there have been vaccines, there have been people who objected to them. Refusing vaccines started as early as the 1800s, when the smallpox vaccine started being used in large numbers. The idea of injecting someone with a portion of a cowpox blister was so disgusting that it faced a lot of criticism and questioning. The criticisms were based on sanitary, religious, and political objections. Some clergy, in fact, believed that the vaccine went against their religion. The belief that vaccines can cause autism has spread widely in recent years. It seems to be more focused on the MMR vaccine that is designed to prevent measles, mumps, and rubella. But multiple, rigorous studies have shown that the MMR vaccine does not cause autism, and most of these studies had large sample sizes from different parts all over the world. And since 2008, we have seen a massive return of preventable diseases because of this anti-vaccination movement. But in the Philippines, our fear of vaccines grew exponentially in 2016 with the implementation of the ScioMago program. In April 2016, the Department of Health launched the dengue vaccination program in Central Luzon, Calabarzon, and Metro Manila, where about 700,000 individuals were injected with one dose of the ScioMago vaccine to help control the illnesses and deaths brought about by dengue. In essence, ScioMago is actually an effective vaccine that works by triggering an immune response against the 4 types of dengue virus. But it will only work if you follow the prescription of the manufacturer, which is to use it on individuals who have had dengue before, because outcomes will be worsened if you inject it on someone who has never had dengue. The Aquino administration at that time, however, were not careful about injecting children who may or may not have been previously infected. And thus, when over 600 individuals who were mostly children died after receiving a single dose of the vaccine, with autopsies indicating internal bleeding in the lungs and the brain, which is indicative of hemorrhagic dengue fever, it is not surprising that we would have a rise in fear and mistrust. Let me be clear that we are not 100% sure that it was the vaccine that killed those children. It was, most likely, dengue, that could have been aggravated by the wrong implementation of the ScioMago program. So as I said earlier, the ScioMago vaccine works, and it works beautifully, but only if you follow the prescription of the manufacturer. And because of the errors in implementation of this vaccination program that had the best intentions, we now have a population of Filipinos who are deathly afraid of the new COVID-19 vaccines, despite the consequences of having an unprotected population. And then there's genetically modified organisms. A genetically modified organism, or a GMO, is an organism that has its genetic content, basically its DNA, altered in order to create a change in its physical characteristics. These alterations are done intentionally in the laboratory or even a farm. But contrary to popular belief, genetic modification isn't exactly new. In fact, we have been doing it for thousands of years. We do it traditionally through the age-old process called selective breeding. This refers to the slow and tedious process of genetic recombination by mating two individuals that have a preferred trait. But despite the slowness of this process, it has allowed the human race to flourish by creating plant and animal varieties that grow faster, grow bigger, and contain more nutrients. Just imagine, prior to agriculture and selective breeding, the human lifespan was less than 30 years old, and we now have more than doubled that. But as I said, the process of selective breeding tends to be slow and imprecise. You have to wait for the natural fertility cycles of the organisms you're working with. And so it could take years, sometimes even decades, for you to find out if the mating was successful. But considering overpopulation, climate change, and limited space, the agriculture industry is pressured into creating crops that can survive altered environments and produce more food with less resources. We do not have time to do trial and error the way our ancestors did. And so the precise and accurate method of genetic modification was invented, where we introduce carefully crafted small snippets of DNA into an organism to express a protein that will change its physical characteristics to make it bigger, more resistant to pests, more nutritious, and more sustainable. The traits introduced in GMOs are not artificial per se. They all come from nature, but from a different organism. So genetic engineering doesn't introduce toxins or poisons into our food. Just a small piece of DNA that helps improve its performance as a crop or as an animal that actually already exists in nature, only in a different organism. This piece of DNA can be easily destroyed by heat or even your own saliva if you eat it. So there is very little means for this DNA to go rampant and spread where we don't want it to. And did you know that there was once a time that the Philippines was a leader in genetic engineering in Southeast Asia? We led the developments in creating drought-resistant crops and various plants that were immune to diseases. And we also contributed largely to the development of golden rice. But a series of violent attacks from activist groups, including burning down crops grown by farmers, has caused the technology to be transferred somewhere else. It is quite ironic that as these genetically modified crops burned, millions of Filipinos remained hungry, and thousands of farmers lose income because of drought and plant disease. That this specific biotechnology can actually help us solve. The distrust of science in the country is rampant. And it is true that science does not have all the answers. What we are taught in our science subjects and what we hear in the news changes all the time. And this is because the discipline of science involves testing all possible explanations to a phenomenon until you are left with the one that is most probable. And so what we are taught in the sciences now might not be what we still get to learn decades later. And so although science isn't perfect, I hope we can give it a chance and encourage other people to trust science. Because the beauty of science is it involves a type of thinking that is logical and rational. It employs the use of facts that are tangible and measurable. And so it can go beyond the biases that exist within us. We need all hands on deck to catch science deniers and counter instances of science denial. But how do we know if someone is a science denier? For one, they create false expertise to magnify their views. They can pretend to be experts in the field and push for medical treatments or environmental management plans that may seem practical but can actually cause more harm than good. Some of them set impossible expectations for science, not giving any room for error or inaccuracy, which is in itself an impossibility, because science only captures snippets of reality and approximates from what we tangibly observe. 100% guarantee is impossible, because of the chaos that exists in nature. Some activist groups are also guilty of picking and choosing from the selection of facts presented, especially those that prove their biases. And this incomplete or obsolete presentation of facts skew reality, while at the same time calling on to the fears and emotions of the viewers, and thus preventing them from making an intelligent choice. And some in positions of power and influence even create elaborate hoaxes and conspiracy theories that combine people's fears and the remote possibilities that are presented. And this ends up sowing distrust, or hate, or discrimination that obscures the facts and the science behind the events and prevents us from acting rationally. And at the end of it, in order for us to prepare for the challenges of this brave new world, we have to arm ourselves with science and the scientific method, to observe and infer, to investigate using reliable resources before we conclude on any issue that we face. I hope you were able to learn something in this short video that talks about the importance of science and critical thinking. If you did, I hope you can give this video a thumbs up and also subscribe to our channel. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please don't hesitate to message me, your resident Filipino scientist, in the comments section below. Thank you very much, and see you around!